Yeah. She probably got the idea from a talk I gave about a month or two ago at high school. I was asked to appear there before 2 or 3 combined classes and talk about my wartime experiences. Hopefully none of you will have to go through any wartime experiences. There have been a lot of changes in the world just recently such that it appears, at least, that we may not have any more world wars like my father had to go through in World War I and I had to go through in World War II. Of course, there have been a number of wars since then, but nothing of world proportions since the war that began in 1939 between Germany and England, and then spread amongst many other nations until the United States entered it in December of 1941 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Most of you don't know what war really is. It's a kind of madness when governments decide that they can use the people that govern to fight one another for their own purposes. That's really about what it amounts to. But sometimes one side of the war can be much less fault than another if it's not an aggressor. The aggressor means somebody who starts it. Japan actually was a classical aggressor in 1941. On December 7th, 1941, they pulled a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor at Hawaii and destroyed a good part of the United States fleet at Pearl Harbor by surprise. I was attending high school at North Phoenix High School at the time, and had hoped to go into the Air Force. We had been at war about 2 years then. This was in the spring of 1943. And a group of us were taken out to Luke Air Force Base, which is just west of Phoenix, to take the exams for the Air Force. We were then to be taken in as cadets in the Air Force to fly airplanes in the war. It was a very hot day, and I was excited, and my blood pressure was too high. So they turned me down for the cadet program on that ground, and it's well known now that your blood pressure can go up when you get excited, and that's exactly what happened to me. And about 2 months later, I was drafted into the Army. When I went to take the exam there, my blood pressure was normal. Because I wasn't particularly anxious to go into the Army. And it's been normal ever since. In fact, the last time I took it was 116/80, which is, for a man of my age, almost too low. However, I was admitted into what they call the specialized training program. Due to grades and so on, a number of us were selected to go into the Army Specialized Training Program. I rode a train to Long Beach, California, Fort MacArthur in mid-July of 1943, having been previously inducted into the Army. And it was a very hot Phoenix summer, and I still remember how pleasant it was at Long Beach right there on the ocean after leaving the deserts of Arizona. We spent about 2 weeks there at the Fort MacArthur Induction Center, and then a group of us were assigned to go to Fort Benning, Georgia for the basic training. We were assigned to the infantry, and we were to go through 13 weeks of basic training in Georgia before being sent to college. The idea was that we would be trained as engineers, and I guess it was a long-range plan. We were to have 4 years of college to become Army engineers. Fortunately, the war didn't last that long. but if it had, I guess that would have been the plan. Anyway, we were put on a train, and due to the fact that they didn't have many air transport planes in those days, and what they did have were busy in other military uses, we had to ride this train for 4 days and 4 nights across Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama into Fort Benning, Georgia, which is at Columbus, Georgia, right on the mid-east borderline of Georgia and Alabama. We didn't have sleeper trains, we just had coaches, so and it was crowded, so it was a miserable 4 days and 4 nights. But nothing anything like as miserable as the train ride we would later take in Germany. We had the normal infantry basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, full field packs and weapons and a lot of outdoor bivouacs and camps and forced marches and night training and that sort of thing. I can remember being so tired on some of those night marches that I'd go to sleep on my feet and find that and wake up as I started to fall as I went off the trail.
Walking?
Oh, walking. They keep us marching maybe 16, 20 hours at a time on what they call forced marches in training for the infantry. Well, after the basic training was over in Fort Benning, we were broken up into different groups and assigned to schools as part of our specialized training. The group I was in was sent to Jonesboro, Arkansas, which was a state college in Arkansas, and quite a nice little school, smaller than the one here in Logan. And there were, I think, 200 of us in our unit. And there were other military groups in training there too, as well as some students who were going to school in the regular way, having not been taken into the military. A lot of girls and some younger boys who were not yet military age or who were not qualified for one reason or another for the military. But at that time, everyone was pretty well mobilized. Either you were not eligible for military service or you were in it in one capacity or another. We had a semester of an engineering training there, and I did all right in my grades and so on. And then this was the spring of 1940. The fall and early spring of 1944. And just before that time, we had learned that there was a shortage of infantry. They were planning the invasion of Europe, which took place just 2 or 3 months later on the beaches of Normandy. And they decided to close out the entire Army Specialized Training Program. And they sent us all to med school to Camp Maxey, Texas, where we underwent further training in the infantry. I was in the 394th Infantry Regiment of the 99th Infantry Division, which had a checkerboard patch on our shoulder for identification. We underwent several months training there. I was assigned to a squad as an automatic rifleman, and my weapon was the Browning automatic rifle, which was like a big heavy rifle, only it was automatic, firing 30 caliber ammunition, and it didn't fire fast. Like a lot of the automatic weapons you hear today, but it was faster then. It was a basic automatic weapon just below the light machine gun. I might mention that while I was at Camp Maxey, we had a lot of marksmanship training, and I always got the highest score in the company on almost everything I tried. I had the best score on the automatic rifle, the best score on the M1 rifle, the best score on the Thompson submachine gun, the best score on the light machine gun. You have a question?
How many were in your company?
200 men in the company.
Wow.
And I had the expert rifleman's badge, which you get to wear with a wreath around it and so on. Anyway, we finally were ready to go, and they shipped us to Camp Miles Standish in Massachusetts, near Boston, actually between Boston and Providence, Rhode Island, nearer Providence than Boston, which was what they call the point of embarkation. We spent about 2 weeks there getting ready to go overseas, and we had quite a bit of free time during those 2 weeks. And I remember just two things distinctively. One is that I went to Boston and saw my first professional football game. The Philadelphia Eagles, I remember them, played some other team, and might have been a Boston team or whatever. But I remember seeing that game. Now, you know, it was a long time ago. That was in 1944. And if you'd asked me now, I would have wondered whether they were even playing professional football in those days. Barry's adjusting the lights. We can turn those off. Would that be better?
No, I want them on.
Chad?
Yeah.
So the weapon you were assigned, was that a good one to be assigned? I mean, were you pleased to have that, or would you rather have had a submachine gun? Or?
Well, no, you never know what kind of situation you're going to get into. But that was just the basic firepower of the squad. Everyone else in the squad had the rifles, and then they had other platoons that manned the light machine guns and the heavy machine guns and so on. And the basic infantry regiment. But it was quite heavy. It weighed probably twice as much as a regular M1 rifle. And then I had the ammunition came in big cassettes about that big, 20 rounds in each one. You had to put the magazine in, and it would go boop, 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 about like that frequency. It was slower than a machine gun, but much faster than a rifle. And I was pretty good at handling it, and therefore I got that assignment. I want to remember I was only 19 years old at the time, and I was at that time I was promoted to private first class. And then after we came back from prison camp, they promoted everybody automatically to another grade, so I was promoted to corporal when we came back. Yes?
How many people did you kill?
I'm not going to concentrate on that because that's not important. You know, the scriptures tell us, "Thou shalt not kill," and I believe in that. The only reason that you get involved in a war is because you have to follow orders. When the government orders you to, you have to be loyal to your country, and you have to do what they tell you to do. That doesn't mean that it's right. Sometimes it's necessary, but it'd be much better if wars didn't exist at all, and I hope you never get into one. It may seem romantic and of great interest to you, but it's not. I'll touch on that a little later, Ben, but that's not the basic reason for me giving this talk. The second item that I remember particularly when we were in Boston was that I went to hear, I got tickets to a show there at the big theater and went to hear Lena Horne. She's still active and still singing, and that's really amazing to me because she must have been just starting her career then. But she was well known and a good singer, and I can still remember hearing her sing Stormy Weather and some of those other songs that sort of made her reputation. We then loaded up and were transported to the dock and went on what they call a Liberty ship. These were ships that were built specifically during World War II for the purpose of transporting troops primarily over to Europe. The ships were 10 to 15,000 tons displacement. They were quite big. Maybe they were a couple hundred, 300 feet long. And the quarters where you slept were bunks with hammocks in a metal frame, about 4 deep on each side as you went down the aisle, and you were assigned to one of those bunks where you slept. It took us about, seems to me, I don't remember the exact time, but it was 10 to 14 days to cross, and we were in a big convoy. The ships would go in large groups, and they'd be escorted by warships, destroyers, cruisers, and so on. Mostly destroyers, because what they were trying to do is keep the U-boats, the German submarines, from sinking the ships. We were attacked 2 or 3 times, although our particular ship was not touched. I think 1 and possibly 2 ships in our convoy were sunk, but that was a small number. U-boats at that time were very effective, and they sank literally hundreds of U.S. and British ships that were transporting troops and supplies across the ocean from the United States to Europe. We arrived at Liverpool, which, in talking to my father earlier, I learned was the same place where he disembarked in World War I, going over there with the 145th Field Artillery from here in Utah. From Liverpool, we rode trains down to a place called Bridport on the south coast of England. This was about 2 months after the invasion had taken place on the Normandy beachhead, and our troops were in France and Belgium at the time, and we were to go in as reinforcements with the First Army on these troops, which were driving towards Germany. We did a lot of maneuvers and practices and so on in the British countryside for a week or 2, and then our particular squad was selected to go to a big old house called Down Hall, which was up on a hill overlooking the ocean in a wooded area, a 45-room mansion that had been there for hundreds of years, where the officers in our battalion were quartered. And we were chosen for the next period, which turned out to be just the rest of the time we were there, before we went over into Europe, to take care of that house for the officers. And we had the servants' wing in the building, which was on the east end of the house, to live in. And it was really quite light duty because we didn't have an awful lot to do except run errands and keep the place clean, and they had their own cooks and so on. And it was really one of the more pleasant times in the Army that I spent, because I enjoyed the house and the estate. It was just like a house out of an Agatha Christie novel. A big, beautiful living room, and the dining room was all walnut paneled with a huge fireplace and the mantel and the huge table with chairs and so on. And it had everything you can imagine. You imagine how interesting it was to go through it with 45 rooms in it. And it was in an area that was all wooded for several acres around. Julie and I had the opportunity to go back and visit it when we went to England years later. And the then owner was complaining that it was difficult to keep it going, that he was having to dip into his principal rather than live off his income entirely to keep it going. But he was very gracious, and he showed us around, and we stayed overnight at a little inn there in Bridport, which is really kind of a seaside resort community on the south coast of England. Small town of maybe 15,000 to 20,000 people. But that was an interesting time for me in England. We then were loaded on landing ships and crossed the English Channel and landed in the same areas where the invasion had taken place, and went to, of course it was all secure by then, went to Rouen, a town on the north coast of England, then over to Le Havre, and then further into the interior. And then we went in and relieved the 9th Infantry Division on the front lines in Belgium, right on the border of Germany. Our exact location, which I was able to remember, was sort of unique. Not where we were at first. We were in foxholes and dugouts along a long line in the woods. But about 800 yards or half a mile in front of that line, we had established, we did establish an outpost. After going on several patrols and so on and having light skirmishes here and there, we were sort of just maintaining the line, getting ready for a big push against what was the well-known Siegfried line of Germany that was just across the border and where they had all kinds of heavy pillboxes and so on. I might mention one particular patrol we went on. We went out on a patrol, just our squad, and we got to an open area, and the squad leader told me to take the assistant BAR man across this clearing to see what was on the other side. It was a clearing in the woods. And we were a little bit skeptical about it and watched our step very carefully, and with good reason, because after walking about 25 yards across this clearing, we came across a single strand of barbed wire hidden in the trees and the weeds. And that was the sign the Germans always used to mark their minefields. And we called back and told the squad leader about the wire, and he called on his telephone and got some experts in there, and they started probing. And we had walked right through a foot minefield. They're plastic explosive in wooden boxes, which are placed just about that deep in the ground, so that when you step on them, they explode and blow off your leg. And they were in staggered rows clear across that minefield, and we had walked right through there without hitting anything.
How many of there were you?
Just two of us. And I led the way, and I actually suspected that something like that might exist there, and was very careful where I walked. And it seemed to me that in the sod there were little areas that seemed a little bit raised, and we avoided that. And sure enough, there must have been at least 100 of those foot mines in there. And we walked right through after that. Otherwise, I might not be here telling this story.
Neither would we. That's right. Didn't be here to hear it.
Yeah. And we went out on other patrols. One time we went out right where our outpost turned out to be later, and we were lying behind a hedgerow and across a railroad track. We could hear the Germans talking. They had a camp right there. We were within a stone's throw of them, and we stayed there for about an hour, and then went back and reported and so on. But our squad then was sent out to establish an outpost in this area out in front of our lines, about 800 yards. We were out in an area overlooking a little town called Logan, which is a small German town right on the railroad. And it was below a rise, which was sort of a hill overlooking it. Maybe kind of like being up on this hill right behind the house, looking down into this little valley of the town would be down here. And the railroad went up and through a ravine on our right, and then the road came up from the town and crossed the railroad, and then came across the other side of our area, so that the railroad was this way and the highway was this way. And we were in 3 different dugouts that we dug. They were there, but we reinforced them when we got up there, and actually put logs across the top of ours and threw more dirt on the top, which if we hadn't done may have been the end of us too, based upon what later happened. We were up this outpost for 2 or 3 days. During one period, our company executive officer, who was a lieutenant, came up to our outpost and went off to the edge of the trees and was standing there with a pair of binoculars looking out over the German emplacements. And they had our area zeroed in and knew we were there, and they unleashed a barrage of 88 artillery and killed him. I guess they saw him standing there with his binoculars. And another guy with him was wounded badly, and they took him back. The night of December the 15th was a cold night, and it had snowed. There was maybe 2-3 inches of snow on the ground in this forest. It was what you might call a national forest in Germany. It was preserved, so there weren't any buildings there. We were in this V formed by the railroad and the road. And early that morning, the battle that was later to be known as the Battle of the Bulge started. Hitler had decided to throw all of his forces, all of his elite panzer divisions, all of his crack infantry forces into one final push to try to push the Allied forces out of Belgium and France back to the English Channel. He thought if he could do that and regain control of France, that he could sue for a more favorable peace. He pretty much knew by this time that he was not going to be able to win the war ultimately, but they were putting everything they could into this one big push. We happened to be right on the railroad and the highway where one of these spearheads was to come through. We later learned that we were hit by the 1st SS Panzer Division. But about 4 o'clock in the morning, the artillery barrage started, which was part of their plan. They opened up with every big gun they had, and our area was completely saturated. We were lying in this dugout. The three of us were in the middle, and then there were 3 others on our left behind us, and 3 others on the right. And those shells were hitting so close that they were bouncing us off the ground in that dugout. And that barrage went on what seemed like a couple hours, but was probably a lot less than that. But it stopped as suddenly as it started. And we looked out, and there wasn't anything that we could see anywhere except branches that had been knocked off the trees and fresh earth. There was no snow at all. The entire area had been churned up with all of this shelling, so that it was just dirt, no snow. We could hear, after the artillery stopped, we could hear just thousands of voices out in the distance, people yelling at each other, as the infantry and so on. We could hear the tanks, the rumble of the tanks and the sound of their engines. And just at daylight, we saw a group of Germans in what you call camouflage uniforms, mottled colors, some in white. In the distance, maybe 100 yards away through the woods, we saw them marching in single file. They went across in front of us and then down the ravine and down the railroad. Here we were sitting up here 800 yards in front of the front lines, and they apparently thought either that we weren't there or that whoever, if anybody had been there, had been killed by the artillery. We could hear them back, and we could hear firing behind us, and then a lot of fighting going on behind us, which is, I guess, when these troops were contacting our front lines. And then we saw what looked like a horde of soldiers in the regular Wehrmacht gray uniform coming toward us, and we just held our fire until a large group of them, maybe 15 or 20, came up right in front of us and stood there, and they were just standing there in a group about like you are, and talking with each other and pointing. They could see our dugouts and wondering whether anybody was there. And then they started toward us again, and we opened fire and kept on firing until they were all down. And at that time, we heard a shout, and then a machine gun off to our right, which we couldn't see, started firing. We had a firing slit about this wide with logs above and below, right at about ground level. And a machine gun we couldn't see opened up on us and started firing a steady barrage of bullets through this slit. Of course, we ducked, and nobody got hit. I had some creases on my hands. I don't know whether they were scuffs or what, but anyway, we weren't really hurt. We could hear these bullets slamming into our dugout right behind us, over our heads. And this went on for a minute or two, and then it stopped suddenly, and we raised up with our weapons in our hands, and I found myself looking right into the end of a German submachine gun. There were 4 or 5 soldiers standing there like this, pointing their guns down through the slit. And of course, we didn't have really time to do anything. I guess we could have fired, which would have been our last time we'd ever fired. But anyway, they went oushed with their guns like this. And it was obvious they were trying to capture us, because it would have been easy for them to, rather than go up and roust us out, to throw in a grenade. But we went out, and they took everything off of us, and I was able to keep a little olive drab bag with my toilet articles in it. They looked in that and saw what it was and gave it back to me. Other than that, they took everything and took us back to a tall, blonde commander of some kind who looked at us and then picked 3 of us out and put us in a squad staff car, a sedan, and drove us back to I guess what was a division headquarters in a little town back beyond Logan. But when we got there, we were questioned at great length, and apart from the fact that I didn't really know very much, of course we had our division patch on our shoulder, and they knew what outfit we were with. But they asked a lot of questions, and about all we could tell them, all I told them, was our name, rank, and serial number, which is all you're supposed to do when you're a prisoner. And they got kind of mean and pushed us around a little bit and got nothing. And then they tried the other tactic. They brought in some bread and jam and margarine and said, "You must be hungry. Would you like something to eat?" So on. But anyway, they were able to get nothing out of us. And then we were taken to a railroad station in a little town. The name of it slips me, and I might divert for a minute right at this point and tell you that after I came back from Germany, I was assigned as a company clerk at Camp Roberts. And one of the first things I did was type out all my experiences. I had 50 pages, single space, where I put all the times, dates, people, places, everything that were fresh in my mind. And that manuscript was either borrowed or taken by some family member, and I lost track of it, and I had not seen it for years. If it ever turns up, it would be really a better source than what I'm telling you now, because I remembered so much more then than I do now. But anyway, we went to this small town in this railroad station, and by this time, other prisoners had been coming in, and most of the prisoners were Americans, but they were not particularly from our unit. They were coming in from over, and to get all mixed up. But,
When you were separated, 3 of you were separated?
yeah.
Did you get back with your...
Later on, we did get back to, in the camp, some of our company, some of the people that we knew eventually ended up in the same camp we did. But this was later on. In this railroad station, we must have been with a group of 100 or so prisoners that had gathered there. And we were just sitting on the floor, and the guards were around and telling us that we'd be taken to a camp. And then they came in and said, "We've got to have your uniforms, that you'll be given other clothing when you get to the camp." That was a big lie. That just didn't take place. They didn't supply clothing to prisoners at all. You had what you had on your back, or you had nothing, as we learned later. But they told us this, and we were reluctant to give up our uniforms because it's all we had. But they threatened us and waved their guns around and so on. So finally, we all decided that was the only thing we could do. So we gave them our uniforms, and they stripped us right down to our long underwear. And there we were in nothing but our long underwear. And these uniforms, we learned later, you want to remember that this was the same day we were captured, which is the first day of the Battle of the Bulge. These uniforms were given to their own soldiers, and they infiltrated American lines and even acted as MPs, diverting traffic and so on, and were finally captured by such tricks as asking them about baseball questions and things like that, that a German who spoke English and learned it in Germany might not know. But they were able to ferret them all out. Also, during that period, and within a day or two afterward, over 100 prisoners who were taken near Malmedy, which is just behind our positions, were lined up in machine gun. That was one of the great atrocities of the war in the European theater. And so, they were not capturing prisoners, and even after they captured them, they were gunning a lot of them down just to get rid of them. It was a very cutthroat time of the war when they knew that if they didn't succeed in this big push to the coast, the war would soon be over. And it was, as a matter of fact, within months after that. But anyway, the next morning, they marched us right through the street in our underwear. And the townspeople were laughing and pointing and all. And it was kind of embarrassing, not to mention the fact that it was cold. It must have been, maybe 10 or 20 degrees above zero. And we were marching, and we joined another large group of prisoners on the other side of town. And many of them had come from tank units. And I was very fortunate. They shared their clothes with us. I was very fortunate. One of the tankers gave me a coverall that was lined with wool and a shirt. And I put those on, and that's all I had to wear for the next 4 months, without it ever being laundered or washed. But we did have our shoes. They didn't take our shoes, or did they? It seems to me like maybe they did, and we got some extra ones too. But in any event, that's what they did with our uniforms. And we then were taken to a railroad station, and that began a 12-day trek. They were using boxcars to transport prisoners. And due to the fact that the American and British Air Forces were doing so much damage to their trains and railroad tracks, they had a shortage. They could only travel at night. They'd have to put the cars on sidings and hope that they wouldn't be hit during the daytime. But because of the shortage, they would jam us into these boxcars. On a couple of occasions were more crowded than others, but I remember on one occasion we were in boxcars steadily for 2 or 3 days and couldn't even sit down because we were too crowded. And we got practically nothing to eat during that time. I remember one time we got out in Bonn. We were there for a day or so, and they fed us a little bit of soup, which we got in our helmets. Another time we'd get a piece of bread, but I think in those 12 days that we were in and out of boxcars, we probably didn't get more than 3 or 4 pieces of bread and soup a couple of times. Wake up, Andy. You're missing the most important part. Okay. I can understand. It was that big dinner that did this.
Just listen to this, cuz.
Anyhow, when you get a little older, you can read the transcript. You have the image. But after 12 days on boxcars, and there were times when we were strafed by Allied planes. They didn't know that prisoners were in the cars, but our particular car was not hit. And finally, on Christmas Day, I remember this particularly, we stopped at a little station called Staffel, S-T-A-F-F-E-L, and it was a small town, and it was cold. It must have been below zero, but we were it was sort of a junction or something. Anyway, we were taken off the boxcars and we were herded into the woods and just had to wait there all day on Christmas Day for our next train. And you don't know what it is to be cold unless you're cold and also hungry. You know, your body heats itself by burning calories, and if you don't have the calories to burn, then the cold just gets to you right to the bone. And a couple of prisoners tried to build a fire out of some wood that was around there, and as soon as the guards saw it, they'd come over and kick it out. They wouldn't permit it. And some of the, as we were walking through the town, some of the ladies came out with little cakes and cookies for the guards because it was Christmas Day. But we got nothing. Finally, later that day, and I think that was probably one of the most miserable days I ever spent in my life, Christmas Day in 1944. Another train came along, and we were herded into that. And 2 days later, we arrived at Stalag 13D in Nurnberg, Germany. Nurnberg is a large, old, medieval-style city, very beautiful old city. And while I was there, a good deal of it was destroyed by bomber raids. But our camp was about 3 miles southeast of town and very near the Nazi Party Stadium. I'll show you a slide of that. I have just half a dozen slides I want to show you to illustrate this. I couldn't do it up here because of the light, but we can go downstairs and see those, which I took about 20 years later when Julie and I visited these areas. I even have slides of the dugout, the foxhole, where we were at the time we were captured. We got into this camp at Nurnberg, and they had barrack-style camps, not unlike the kind you see in Stalag 17, isn't it? The TV show. But that's the only thing that's anywhere near accurate. It was not a happy time, and they weren't a bunch of guys having a great time as prisoners like they show you on TV. It was far from that. We had practically nothing to eat, and everybody was hungry. We were told that the Red Cross had provided boxes at these prisoner war camps. And we later did get some Red Cross boxes, but even though they had plenty to give us each one every week, they only gave us 4 men to 1 box. Only 2 or 3 times while I was in the entire camp. You know, the boxes were really something. There'd be a box of dried prunes, and there'd be a box, a can of corned beef, and stuff that just seemed like gold to us. But to divide it 4 ways, it didn't go very far. They even had cigarettes in the boxes, and it was surprising to note that despite the fact that they were very hungry and needed food far more than cigarettes, the men who were heavy smokers missed cigarettes more than they did food. And some of them traded their portion of the cigarette of the Red Cross boxes for food. And I know at least one guy who died about 2 weeks later, mostly of malnutrition, who had traded practically all of his food for cigarettes because they gave him, I guess, something he needed more than he thought he needed food. While now, where was I? We've had a brief respite to turn over the tape.
When?
What?
First one? It's been a while.
The guy that died from lack of
Oh, yeah.
nutritious food traded cigarettes.
We were soon told that all the enlisted men would have to work, and the work was pretty ghoulish because what happened was that while we were there and during the days between December 27th and January 13th, 1945, there were a lot of 1,000-plane raids on Nurnberg. We could see them. Some of them would come in the daytime. And some of them would be pinpoint raids on railroad junctions and that sort of thing. One raid during the daytime was at a railroad junction which wasn't very far from where we were. And we could just see the fire and the dirt and the smoke going up as the bombs hit, about a mile away from us. And some of these night raids just devastated the city. And we were told we'd have to work, and it turned out that the work was helping to bury the dead. On one night raid alone, more than 4,000 people were killed in Nurnberg. And they were burying them in trenches, just throwing them in side by side in these trenches. And we were put to work helping to dig the trenches and cover them up. And we did that for several days, and then we went in to help clean up rubble. One was a military office building, and in one room there was the remains of a dinner. Apparently they'd been having dinner when the raid came, and in the rubble I found some biscuits, some white biscuits. I hadn't seen any white bread for months, and they were hard as a rock. But I got 3 or 4 of them, and they really tasted great. You know, chewed on those white biscuits as hard as a rock that I found in the rubble. And I also found a lot of knives and things like that, and I put them in my pockets and hidden them in the bunk, these wooden tiered bunks. And one day when we were out working, they pulled an inspection of the barracks and found this little bag I had with knives and stuff in it. And when I got back into camp, at the gate they called out my name and jerked me out of and a couple other guys who found stuff, and threw us into solitary confinement. But prior to that, I had a knife that I'd used to cut bread. And one day I cut through the bread, and I still have the scar where it went deep into my thumb. And I showed the guard what I'd done. It was really bleeding, and he just brushed it off and said, wrap a rag around it or whatever. You know, there was no medical attention, nothing. And fortunately, I didn't get any infection or anything from that. But on another time, they held an inspection in this building we were working in, and I had this sharp knife in this overcoat pocket, and they were searching everybody, and they came up to me and ran their hands down my legs, feeling all over for anything, and I pulled I had a coat on, and I pulled it apart, and they went down everywhere, but they didn't feel in the overcoat pockets, so they didn't find the knife. Or I don't know what might have happened. But in any event, we got thrown in this small cell. It was about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. It had a wooden bunk in it with a straw tick, which, as it turned out, was full of lice and bed bugs and ticks. I had all 3 of them all the time I was in that cell. It had a metal door, and it had a barred window with a box over it, so that a little bit of light would come in the tunnel, but you couldn't see out. And the guards would come by twice a day, once in the morning with what they called a little coffee. It was nothing but a chicory stuff. And warm. It had practically no food value in it. And then at noon, you'd get a bowl of soup, which was mostly potato soup with no potatoes, and sometimes potato peelings in it. Julia's made some up. Why don't you take a minute now and show them roughly what it looks like. So all you get is this hot drink in the morning, and then this soup, and then we'd get 1/7 of a loaf of bread in the evening. The loaves were this heavy pumpernickel bread about this long, about that square, and they loaded them into trucks like cordwood. They weren't wrapped or anything, and they just cut them into 7 pieces and give you 1/7 of a piece, and all you got for a whole day was this metal bowl of soup And bread similar to this, only not near as good a quality, and maybe a little thicker than that. That'd be your day's ration of food.
Really good?
Yeah.
Is that really what it looks like?
On a good day, they might get a piece of potato like that.
Was it hot?
It'd be hot.
Have a piece of this bread. It has
They just
like
have a
white
big
one.
vat of it, and they wheel it down the corridor in the prison, and open your door and ladle it into your bowl.
His was a lot harder than that. He said. Maybe you had to cut through with his
I
knife.
tell you though, that bread tasted mighty good. It wasn't very good quality, and I'm sure it had sawdust and all kinds of other stuff in it to make it look good. It tasted pretty good. Great reducing diet.
Yeah.
What foods did you dream about eating?
Well, mostly I thought of rice pudding and things like that.
Creamy and
Creamy and full.
Did you think of fresh fruits?
Not so much, just something with substance to it.
Something that would fill you up?
Baked potato or
They
rice
have
pudding.
any fat, like in
Carbs.
bread and bacon grease, carbohydrates in there too. Want a piece of the bread?
Can I try the soup?
You want to try the soup?
Well, it was fortunate.
Taste it, Dad. See if that's what it tastes like.
You want to taste it?
It didn't have any seasonings or was it just water with potatoes in it? Potato peels.
Sometimes it would have just potato peeling to it. Sometimes a few small pieces of potatoes. I remember one time it seemed like kind of a treat, but we got a little square of what's said on the outside of it, Käse Zucker. It was cheese. But the catch was that it was almost entirely molded. It was just full of mold. That's why they gave it to us, because it had spoiled.
Maybe that protected
But we
you.
still ate
Was
it.
it a mean trick?
You know,
Probably good for you, penicillin.
in this cell, fortunately, they had books available there, and I was able to get a copy of the Bible, and I still have it. This is the one that I got from the jailer in that little cell.
No, blue one.
And
Was it new
it's-
then?
It was, it may have been, I don't know whether it's new or not, but it's got the stamp right in here, Stalag 13D. You proofed. I don't know what all this language says, but anyway, that's it, and I read this volume through completely twice while I was in that cell. I was just in there for 10 weeks. I went through every word in here twice. I also had a little address book that I'd received from my father as part of a Christmas present just before we were captured. And it's a little leather-bound address book with the Army insignia on it. And while I was in the camp, based on a map of the United States in the book, that's it right there, I drew a detailed map of every state in the Union and put in every city I could think of.
Is that your drawing?
Yeah, that's all
These
my
blank pages?
freehand drawing on blank paper. I spent a lot of time doing that. Enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed maps and geography. It's one of the reasons I like to fly. It's a lot of fun. to
Where
make
did you
the
get the
charts.
pencils?
Well, I had a red and blue pencil and a fountain pen, and they would supply me with ink. They were good enough to do that.
Turn it towards the camera, Dad.
And I also drew a map of the United States on the inside of the cell door. One time, the old crusty jailer, there were two jailers, Hans, who was about 70 years old, and real gruff Prussian type, and Fritz, who was Hanson Fritz. And he was a younger guy, but he was crippled. I think he'd been wounded in the war. He walked with a very bad limp. They were our jailers, and they were the ones who delivered the soup and the bread and so on. And one time, old Hans saw that map I'd drawn on the inside of the cell door, and he said, "Wash him," telling me to get it washed off there, but I never did.
What did he say about Sacramento?
Oh, he saw that I had Sacramento on there for Sacramento, California. And that's a cuss word in German. So he thought that was real funny. I also wrote in here every address I could think of some of my friends and some soldiers I met in the camp from Great Britain, from France, and so on. And also I was able to get a copy, much like this one, of The Royal Road to Romance by Richard Halliburton. And I thought that was such a fascinating book. I read it 2 or 3 times, and you couldn't have gotten a book to somebody locked up in solitary confinement that you would have enjoyed more than this book. It's about his travels throughout the world.
You said there wasn't much light that came in. How were you able to read?
Well, there was enough light during the daytime, and there was one light bulb in there, which they didn't burn very long in the evening, but for a little bit. There was a bucket in the corner, which was the toilet, and in the morning you'd have to empty that just across the hall. And, but I really read and enjoyed this book. And another book I got hold of and read was How Green Was My Valley by Richard Bulge. That was a good book. And it made me think of Cache Valley, you know, the green valley.
Did it give you hope, or did it just make you feel more homesick, or did it make you feel discouraged when you read this book?
Well, I was pretty upbeat and optimistic. I felt that eventually that we were going to win the war, and if we could stay alive, that we'd get out, and just a matter of time. I never gave up hope or anything like that. I was pretty optimistic, although it was a very depressing time at times. Yes.
Now, was your food cut at all when you went into solitary?
Well, there was a period when they cut it from 6 men to a loaf of bread to 7 men to a loaf of bread. I don't remember whether that was just before I went into solitary or just after.
So you got the same food even when you were in the cell?
Yeah, except that when you were out with all the others, there were more opportunities, sometimes to trade something for an extra portion or something like that. And like I said, when I was out working, it didn't really cost those hard biscuits that much.
Did you dream about food a lot? I mean, and when you ate it, did you savor every bite and make it last? Or did you just gulp it down?
I wasn't that sentimental about it. It's crazy. Knowing you had to get as many calories as you could just to stay alive.
Yeah.
My health was generally pretty good. One of the guys that was in solitary, who I had contact with occasionally, the name of Driver, got acute appendicitis while he was in there and was taken out, and I learned later that he was operated on in a German hospital and did survive. But I was taken out and interviewed by a guy who spoke very good English. He was what they called the confidence man. He was the go-between between the prisoners and the guards. And he told me that I was going to be shot. He said even for a German civilian, if they were found picking up things out of bombed-out buildings, that they'd be shot for looting. I said, well, it wasn't exactly that. You know, we were in there working. But anyway, that's the impression they left me with, and I was a little bit concerned about that. Finally, in early April, or no, I think it was in March 23rd, if I remember correctly, 3 of us who were all in that solitary area were taken out and went with 2 guards into Nurnberg, which was about an hour's walk, to the Hall of Justice, which is the same court building where all of the Nazi war criminals were tried a year or 2 later. Anyway, we were taken in there. We were waiting in the waiting room. The court proceedings were going on. We were supposed to have a trial. And I don't know whether they'd assigned, I doubt they'd even assigned any counsel for us or anything, but after we waited for about an hour, we were able to talk with some other French prisoners in there awaiting trial. And they told us that the Americans had crossed the Rhine. So that was the best news we've heard in a long time. Just leave them alone.
I have a question. Did you understand German? Any German?
Well, yeah, we picked up quite a bit of it. as I was telling you at dinner, a lot of words are the same as English, and you quickly learn those, but even, you know, I didn't speak French, and I didn't speak Russian, and there were prisoners of all extractions in there. And we certainly had to communicate with each other a little bit in German. I would say I had a working vocabulary in German of several hundred words by the time I got out of there. I could communicate on basic things. But to go back to this time in the court, after we'd waited there almost all day, the guard came back and told us that our trial had been continued. And we marched back to camp. On the way, he let us stop, and the grass was just starting to get green, the snow had melted, and there were some dandelions coming up. And I remember pulling up some dandelion greens and eating them, and they were just delicious. It was good food, probably one of the best things I could have done. A lot of vitamin C.
I have you getting scurvy.
Vitamin C is something I've had practically none of for 4 months, I guess. But we were taken back, when we got back, we were taken out of our solitary cells and put in what they called a Strafe compound, which is an area of prisoners who were awaiting trial. There were about 30 prisoners in there, most of them French and Belgians, and only three Americans. And we were to stay in there until April 17th. While we were in there, we found that behind our fence was a group of British prisoners, and we were able to worm our way under the fence. There wasn't a lot of security between the compounds, just around the perimeter. And they had a shortwave radio in there, which was hidden in some kind of a box, and they put it away and so on. They were able to pick up the BBC, and we got pretty current news on how the war was going, and picked up our spirits. Russians were in another compound, and they treated them even more terrible than us. They were dying frequently of typhus. We fortunately had been inoculated against typhus and tetanus and things like that, and I didn't really get sick the whole time I was in there. But they were hauling several of those Russians out of there on stretchers every day, dying mostly of typhus, I think. And when they'd go in to feed them, they would all crowd around, and the guards would just wade into them, swinging their rifles, and knock them in which direction. One time, I remember they took us over to an area for a shower. I think we only got 1 or 2 showers all the time we were in there. But well, in that area, I noticed a bunch of these huge ovens, and I recognized them later, which they used to incinerate people. And I don't know whether they were burning the Russian prisoners that died or whatever, but we did get our shower, and while we were getting out, a group of Russians was brought in. And they looked just like these pictures you see of emaciated corpses. They marched all the way from the Russian front. They were just walking skeletons. Some of them had their toes completely rotted off, just oozing. It was just sickening, the condition they were in. This period, this war was a demonstration of how inhumane human beings can be to one another, and how they can lose sight of their humanity and all civilization when they get involved in a war where they try to justify almost any kind of conduct in the name of some sort of crazy race supremacy like Hitler had in mind, which enabled him to justify killing millions of innocent people. Pick it up and take it out.
Did you get any soap when you got your shower?
I don't remember whether there was any or not, but if it was an emaciated-looking little bar that wouldn't lather. You know, soap was one of the things that were in short supply, along with food.
Was it a warm shower? Warm water?
I think it was. I recall. I know it felt good. But after being in this compound for a while, we learned, of course, that the war was going better for us. And about 2 days before we were liberated, we noticed a difference in the attitude of the guards. They were much more friendly and condescending. And on the morning of the 17th of April, artillery started coming in to our compound. Several shells lit very near. In fact, some of the prisoners in this particular small barracks we were in had constructed a dugout out in front in the event there was this kind of difficulty. And many of them ran out while the shelling was going on, and I think 2 were killed by a shell that lit right in the front area. And
From the Allies.
from the Allies, yeah. They didn't know we were a prison camp. And we stayed in and weren't hurt. The building wasn't hit. And later on in the day, the tanks from the 45th Division just came right through the wire. And they got out of the tanks and talked to us and said how glad they were we were free now and so on. And
Well, had the Germans vacated then?
yeah, during the night they had all left.
Did you know that?
We didn't know that until morning. There'd been no place to go anyway.
How did you feel when you saw these
Great,
Americans?
great.
Were they Americans?
Yeah, and they immediately took us to their mess tent and fed us a big GI meal. I couldn't eat that. My stomach was so shrunk that I couldn't hold very much.
How much weight do you think you lost?
I estimate that I lost at least 50 pounds.
What did you weigh back then?
I weighed 175 or 80 when I went in there. That was pretty thin. We had 3 or 4 days just to be on our own. They kept track of us, but they said they were going to fly us out. And sure enough, we were flown out 3 or 4 days later on the C-47 over to Brussels. And from there we went to what they call Camp Lucky Strike, which was a camp for prisoners to get shots and delousing and all that before we were put on a ship to go back home. But
So that was the first medical care you got?
yeah, while we were waiting, I was able to browse around town, and in one bombed out house I found this purse with all of this old German money in it. It's inflationary money. I don't know whether, I don't think it'd have any value now. This is 100 marks. Some of them are real high, because they had, this is 1,000 marks. They had real high inflation just after World War I. So I found this, I found a lot of coins, and we were able to go into this huge Nazi party stadium where 500,000 party members used to have their rallies. And if you don't think that's a big stadium, the Coliseum in LA holds 100,000. This held 500. And they had this, at the end of it, they had this huge swastika. And I was there when the troops dynamited it off. I saw it blown up.
They don't know what that is.
And I have a photograph of the stadium that we took in 1966 when we went there, showing where the swastika was. And the camp had been demolished when we went back. But I have some pictures of the area and some of the old barbed wire still there. And we found the junction where our outpost had been, and even found the dugout where I've been. And I have some slides of those things to show you in a few minutes when we go downstairs.
Dad, tell them what a swastika is.
While there, I went up in the stadium, and in this stadium, right where they had their Nazi party rallies, I got these flags. They were just stacked up on shelves, you know. They put them out on stabs when they'd have their rallies. And this is one of them right here.
They must have used good material.
This may have flown over that stadium when Hitler was ranting and raving about all the great things he was going to do for Germany. And this is a death's head that's pinned on here. That's the insignia of the SS troops, which were Hitler's elite troops.
Why did they use that? Why did they use that? Because they were sick.
Oh, they were absolutely amoral people, you know.
But I mean, it's so obvious.
Absolutely
Something is
crazy.
that
They were
was
crazy. And this is what they wore on their. This is a super deluxe one. This one's
that
all
on
rolled
their
with the
arms?
silk swastika. They wore it on their left arm.
Did you see that all the time when you were in?
Oh yeah.
So you like got those
And this is what the SS flew from their cars.
skeleton. Why did they look at that mean
That
to?
means kill all the
Just
Jews.
their insignia, skull and crossbones.
That is sickening.
And this is the insignia of the Arbite Battalion. A lot of young boys that were maybe 16, 17 were drafted into the work battalions. And they used to march very precisely and sing the German marching songs. It was quite impressive. I had to try it. We'd see them around all the time. And here's a smaller flag that I got in that stadium. And that one is
Double material. Right?
double material. It has a place for a pole to go through there.
That is sick.
Here's the original German Army knife. I found it in one of those houses.
How many blades?
Oh, it has about a dozen different things.
Can the kids look at these things closer?
Sure.
Not right now, wait.
This is a pack that I got that was the kind that were worn by some of their elite troops, and that one has a skin on the
What's
back.
that box? I just think it's amazing that Dad was thinking along the lines of memorabilia. Here he was 120
And this is a dagger that was worn by the SS officers.
Ew, yucky. If I brought this to school, I could probably get extra credit dropped on
It
it.
has etched on the blade,
He's not gonna lend it.
mine,
Not the knife.
Ice Troy. That's my honor is loyalty. Loyalty to Hitler was the only thing that was important to them.
Where did you get that?
I think I traded something to somebody that had found it or something anyhow. I got it in that 4 days when we were on our own and wandering around.
You just found it on the ground or something?
No, I didn't find it on the ground.
And that was something that you hid that they didn't find on you?
No, we got that.
No, no, this is right after we were liberated.
Oh, okay.
I got all that stuff after we were liberated.
Okay.
Were you real excited that you'd won the war? I mean, did you ever really?
In that house, I've also found this little knife. It's got on here, Erinnerung am Meine Kriegszeit. It's a souvenir of the war of 1914 to 18. And it has the Cologne Cathedral on the back of it. And there's a story here I didn't tell you, but while I was in solitary, I heard a tap on the door, and one of the prisoners who had been let out to empty his bucket or something had slid the door open, and he was a Frenchman, and he handed me this knife. He told me he wanted me to have it, and said that he was going before a court-martial, and I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him.
Did he
Anyway, he
speak
gave me
English?
this knife, and I was able to keep it even during times when they looked through our stuff, because in that tote article kit I had was a little Colgate can of tooth powder, and I'd long since used it all up, but I slipped off the top and put this inside of that. And I've had guards look through my stuff and even pick up that can and shake it, and it was tight in there, so it just seemed like a can of tooth powder. You never found it.
Very heavy can.
But that knife, I don't know what the history of it is, but that's how I got it.
Dad, can you explain a brief history about the Germans' philosophy so that the kids could understand sort of what their thinking was?
Well, Hitler was a corporal in World War I, and he was very bitter about their defeat, and he felt that the peace that was forced on them by the Treaty of Versailles was unfair to Germany. Of course, he was prejudiced, and he looked at it only from one side. And Germany was supposed to pay a lot of reparations, most of which they never paid. And he spent a lot of time studying and reading, and finally he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means My Battle. And in it he set forth his philosophy, exactly what he intended to do. And he was down on Jews and felt they were responsible for most of the financial problems in the world. So gradually he built up a Nazi party and got people to join him, and they had several scuffles with the police and beer halls and so on. And gradually they got more and more adherents and got more respectability, and finally he was able to convince the masses of the German people that he was their savior, that he would be able to put Germany back on its feet and conquer the world. And they built up their war machine and followed his blueprint. And of course, it was a very fortunate thing that he was defeated, because billions of, probably hundreds of millions of people would have been killed had he conquered the world. He would have done away with everybody who didn't fit into his stereotype of the master race.
He thought that he wanted to make a people that were better than anyone else.
Supposedly, yeah. Just based on racial characteristics, blonde and.
Isn't that awful?
There's a lot you can read about him in your world history books, more than I can tell now. Well, that's, I might say that after we came back, we were treated quite well. I was given 30 days leave at home, and then I was sent to Santa Barbara, California, where we had 2 weeks at a luxury resort. I stayed at the Miramar Hotel there, which is still there, and had a delightful time. And then I was sent to Camp Roberts, where I was put in the training cadre and stayed there until I was able to get out of the service a little early because of my bruising war clothes. And I finally got a discharge in December of 1995.
Did you ever try to escape when you were in prison camp? Take her out.
Well, there was one time when we were in this drop compound when we discovered a manhole that went down into a sewer just inside the fence. And by exploring it, we learned that it went under the fence and came up in some buildings outside the entire camp. And 3 or 4 of us were going to try it, and a couple of guys went down. And the guy in the lead, after he'd gotten, maybe 50, 100 feet through it, ran into sewer gas so bad that they had to almost pull him out by the heels. So we gave that up. That was really the only time. But you know, by the time I got out of that solitary confinement, there wasn't any chance of getting out there. But by the time I got out, when the news was so favorable, we knew it was only a matter of time before we would be liberated. So it was silly to take any undue risks and get yourself shot trying to escape when you're going to be liberated in a few weeks. Yeah.
Was it the same kind of setup like you see on TV with the big tall guardhouses and?
Yeah, that was similar, but what you don't get on TV is the filth and the smells and so on. You know, it was just a miserable situation.
You didn't have any. What was it? Just like an outhouse, or not even an outhouse that you got to go in? What was it? Latrine?
They had latrines, which were separate buildings. They were just holes where you had to squat down. Then they had a long metal tub with water running into it where you could wash your hands and so on. In the camp itself, they didn't have any showers except those where they just let you go once in a while.
Were you free to just walk around then during the day if you weren't working?
Well, except that they had very early times when you had to be in the barracks. You couldn't be outside after dark. And of course, before I was put into the solitary confinement, I was working almost every day. We'd go out early in the morning and come back late at night.
You believe what Nietzsche says and what we marathons believe? That which does not kill you makes you stronger?
If you survive it, it's very possible, sure. It gives you more moral fiber to overcome adversity.
So you think you're stronger from that experience?
Probably.
More
I was going to ask her the same thing. Did you have time to just have a lot of reflective thinking, especially in solitary? Did you feel like?
Well, that's when I was doing a lot of reading and so on. Sure, I did a lot of reading.
How about any religious?
Well, reading the Bible twice involves a lot of religious thought.
Any revelations?
See, I not only read it, but I underlined it. And you can see throughout this book, I underlined whatever passages I thought were important. There are a lot of them in the New Testament.
Did you pray more? I mean, did you feel, I'm sure you felt more inclined to have faith and things like that. I would.
Well, to a certain extent, but not a great deal more. I had a lot of hope, and I wasn't despairing to the point where.
If you've been there for a couple of years, you might have gotten to that point where you
You know, the old poem, think, act, strive, reason, then look up and pray. Do everything you can, and
or like Jen said about having
you kids can look at this stuff if you like, but be very careful with it. And, oh, this is just a German ammunition container. Metals and stuff for that. I say to read things.
oh, you take
I don't know whether they were just slow.
Dad, were any of your brothers in the war? No, they would have been too young.
Well, no, my brother, just younger than me, was in the Coast Guard. I don't know. One in particular, a fellow by the name of Harry K. Chan, who was a close friend of mine in the company, a Chinese fellow from San Francisco. He and I maintained contact for years afterwards. In fact, I visited with him in San Francisco several times. But unfortunately, he died of leukemia about 15 years ago.
He was a nice guy.
Very nice guy. You met him, didn't you, Julia? Yeah. Hey, I'm going to give you a test now on lecture.
Sure, she's smart. Any volunteers to take her home?
I have to show slides.
I want to see slides.
Maybe Steve will, Mom. Talk to him.